Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the best decks in standard best of one up to Mythic Rank. So we're going to be focusing, it's the last couple days of the month, it's the 29th. So folks are gunning for that top 1200 finish to get their invite to the next qualifier weekend. As such, we are going to be looking at what decks are doing the best in Mythic Rank for this particular month, or this week or so. So we got a couple community decks as well of folks who just recently got into Mythic with decks. So we'll look at those and kind of look at variations of some of the common archetypes. So as always, we get the data from UntapedGG, what you see on the screen. Tracks user win rates, gives a whole bunch of cool stats, has a whole bunch of like cool in-game overlay stats that help you kind of navigate the game. If you want to use Untap, link is in the video description. Otherwise, you can find all these deck lists pasted in the video description, so you can copy and paste to your heart's content. Just to kind of wrap up the charity drive that we are doing, for folks unfamiliar, we are donating every penny that we make off YouTube this month on the channel to local Toronto-based food bank. So we're just a little bit short of our goal of $800. So we got $677, which I will be donating today or tomorrow once I get a chance just to ship everything over before the end of the year. And then for sub goal, we are 55 subs away from 16,000 on the channel. It'd be really sweet to hit 16,000 before the end of the calendar year. So if you haven't subbed to the channel, it's free, easy, helps out. Support, as always, likes and comments go a long way to help out. So enough shilling. Let's go and look at it. So top deck right now in terms of popularity. So what you're going to be seeing the most: mono red at 12%, mono black midrange at 11%, Boros Auras at just a shade over 10%. Then you have the Mardu Aggro all the way down at 3%, which is basically the Auras deck with the Fling package. So you can almost include this together in one setting. Azorius Control, 3%. Azorius Control doing really bad this week, like 51%. The Dimir Midrange deck, very, very strong in best of 3. Not as strong in best of 1 because you end up with the wrong half problem. You know, I got a bunch of cut downs against Azorius Control, or you get your counter spells or just weird cards against the aggro decks, doesn't kind of align as well. Mono black discard 2.5%, and then the reanimator decks also not doing too hot this week, so at 2%. So if we are looking at the games played for December 22nd through to the 29th, we have 79,000 games played. And then just kind of jumping into it, mono red aggro, highest win rate deck, most played deck. The mice are very formidable, but we do see a little bit of a shift this week. So in past weeks, we've seen the full shock package, no lightning strikes, and then 3 witch stalkers frenzies, which is kind of the akin to the best of 3 version of the deck. In best of 3, you usually see lightning strikes played more because you have like Enduring Curiosity, you have Glissa, you have Slasher, you have things with the 3 toughness, where in best of 1, because the format tends to be a little bit more aggressively slanted, the shocks help you kind of catch up against the more aggressive decks in the mirror. Core of the deck, you have your mouse package, Heartfire Hero, smack in for a whole bunch of damage. So a couple of tweaks in terms of this variation here. While not necessarily the next sequential in terms of win rate, I wanted to show a variation. Boros Burn has been having a good week. 59, just a shade under 60%. A lot of overlap in this deck. So you still have your mouse package, notably no Slickshot show off, -1 Swift Spear here. Still have your Nemesis, but with the white cards, you're splashing for Lightning Helix. So just a Lightning Strike with upgrade helps you in the mirrors or the red-based mirrors to gain you some life, helps you kind of pace like that. Then you also have Boros Charm. So 4 to the face, indestructible, or double strike. So depending what you're doing, you might just want a double strike if you can push out enough power that, you know, the double strike does more than 4. Otherwise, you could protect something in a pinch if you got like a lone creature, or just double strike something of that nature. There's also kind of a cool line where you can double strike your opponent's creature to make it like when it blocks Screaming Nemesis, or you block with Screaming Nemesis to turn off Lifegain. There's a whole bunch of like cool iterations with that. The deck itself, biggest downside with it is the mana base. There's no red-white Verge, so you got to play Thran Portal. Restless Beovac's not the end-all be-all. It's a reasonable creature land. One Raucous Carnival. You'd be like, why are we playing this? Well, you're a burn deck, and most players will be at 13 or less life by the time this comes out, so you're hoping that it's just a 1-of, you draw it later in the game, and it's an untapped land. So Mardu Aggro, which is the Auras deck, is 63%. So again, your mouse package. This one here has got Slick Shot, only 2 Manifold in this one here. The big kind of additional cards, Shardsman's Rescue, Sheltered by Ghost. One thing to keep in mind, if you haven't been keeping up with like your bulk, Sheltered by Ghost, at least here in Canada, is like 10 bucks a copy for an uncommon. So dig them out. They are worth quite a penny. So keep that in mind. If you don't actually play the card, you just have them from like pre-release or something. You're sitting on some cash if you just got random bulk. But the core of this deck is just make a really large creature smack in with added protection. So we saw in like past weeks sometimes Lauren reveal. You also have the Fling package with Callous Sellsword. So notably no actual black mana. You're just using it for its burn together ability. The one thing with this deck, folks, sometimes like there's going to be the games you just autopilot, like, you know, 1-drop, equip, protect. And kind of go to town there. But this one here, like, it's sometimes reasonable to hold up the Shards Mage to play like a turn behind. Keeping a creature out is important. This one here notably has no Optimistic Scavenger, the 1-drop, playing more as like a pseudo prowess style strategy. So some little like tweaks along the edges week over week. We have a rare Lifegain Andy, 60%. So trying to compete with these aggro decks. Now, the Lifegain isn't just you auto win the game, because the red decks can output huge amounts of damage through Heartfire Hero, the Double Strike, all the pumps, Monstrous Rage. But there is ways you can kind of slow them down and then just make very large creatures. This deck here, you have your Johnny Pridemate, your Essence Chandler, both can get bigger when you gain life. Linden was a card that was reprinted in Foundations. Sorry, just had to cough. So whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life. So this is each instance, which gives you some nice ability. Life linkers, enter the battlefield, gain lives, trigger life gain. You have Night Errant and Evios that can give you some card advantage. Leyline of Hope doubles the amount of life, or gains 1 more. And then if you have 27 or more, it's like that. It's like a mini Righteous Valkyrie through a Leyline. And then you have Sheltered by Ghosts, just the all-star card. Get a big Pridemate, lifelink it, go to town like that. And then with Essence Chandler, there is a way here to just get really large. The one thing you may want to consider with this, because it gets flying when you lose life, there's no ways to kind of trigger the life loss. We've seen in the past with the Bats deck, they play pain lines sometimes. So you could just play like an off-color pain line just to pain yourself. So like the black-white one, whatever the one you want. Just to kind of deal that 1 damage, because the flying could be really reasonable in some games. We have Selesnya Auras, 59%. So green gives you access to some pseudo hexproof through Ward. So you have Toadstool Admirer, you have Tomokul Honor Guard, and then you have the Armored Armadillo. All cards that are pretty terrible in their own right, but the Ward in conjunction with a lot of enchantments gives you kind of a buffer, because the big thing here is you're worried about getting your thing cut down or go for the throated or shocked on turn 1. Realistically, these can't be targeted until like Armored Armadillo on turn 2 from a cut down, but most of these maybe turn 3 at the earliest. With the protection effects, you could hopefully get it out of range by there. This one's also playing Anthem of Champions, so an enchantment that just buffs your team collectively. You have the Calyx that could let you copy enchantments. It's also got Constellation, so when an enchantment enters the battlefield, you put a counter on target creature, similar to the Eerie effect. So you can make very large creatures. You give Trample with Audacity or Evasion through Feather of Flight. So with this deck here, you can probably get away with, honestly, even just playing some more Hushwood Verges. Just you have enough basics to make it work in that case. Then we go to 4-color Domain. So this is like the Zur Lockdown deck. The one thing with these decks here, sometimes folks don't adapt them well enough for best of 1. These decks tend to beat up on the mid-range piles, but can suffer game 1. If you are struggling a bit with this deck, you can just up the number of like lockdowns. You can go with like an additional copy of 1 or 2 like Elspeth Smite or Not on My Watch, as just having some more cheap removal. But the core of this deck, you have all these overlords that you can cast for their impending cost. So kind of a cost reduction to get the effect. You can then either scroll shift them to put them back into play, or you can Zur the Eternal Schemer to animate them, give them lifelink, a whole bunch of stuff. You get the attack trigger even though they're impending. The kind of cleanest lines with these decks is Overlord on 3, Zur on 4 with enough mana to animate, attack, get another line. So lots of incidental life gain with the deck. You have some sweepers, just kind of overwhelming value with the once you get the ball rolling. The deck can struggle a bit with a lot of tap lands. It can kind of fall behind a little early, but it does have the ability to draw a lot of cards and then just kind of value engine out your opponent. So then we have mono black mid-range. This is the demon version, so 57%. Just a lot of cheap removal. We mentioned this last week as well. The one thing I would prefer with this deck when playing it, I switched up some numbers of like edicts, as well as I think I took out all the edicts and I just play the full set of Go for the Throat. Having targeted removal is very important in this format. You could also additionally kind of split between Anoint with Affliction. The one thing I found was against bigger things, so like Shieldred, Anoint doesn't hit. So you could kind of hedge where you want to be. Like you could do better against the aggressive decks, could do a little bit better against the bigger decks. This is one of the problems of these mid-range piles, is your removal has to be kind of catch-all. Whereas like in best of 3, you can kind of tailor it for that. But you got the combo Slasher into Bloodletter. You also have Unholy Annex as a card draw engine in the deck. The one thing you'd probably want to see here is either like a copy of Myrex or Fountain Port in the mana base, just give you something to do if you do flood out of mana. So this one here was 2 decks down, but I want to compare because it's close enough. So this is mono black discard. So this one's a little bit more into the discard package. You have Bandit's Talent, you have Hopeless Nightmare, both cards that care about discarding. The Talent's kind of your pseudo win condition in a way, but you're stripping resources early, cut downs, Go for the Throats as your removal, a little bit more creature dense. With Preachers in here, you have Archfiend of Dross, and then your Unholy Annex. So you only have the 4 demons plus the demons of Ritual Chamber, Lilies, and then Aklazot's on the top end. Like something like this in terms of the mana base for the other deck could be reasonable. You could still kind of cast everything, but have some utility lines included. Dimir Midrange, 56%. So this one here, pretty close to the best of 3 version. You have cheap removal, nowhere to run, Go for the Throat in here, Anoint with Affliction, cut down, your cheap flyers, tempo elements with like Flood Pit Drowner, tap down stuff. Faebloom Trick lets you tap down a creature and then gets you some blockers. Tishana's for activated or triggered abilities. Trying to cheat out Kaido and just letting it kind of run to town. During Curiosity draws you a whole bunch of cards, plays really nicely with Shelly. And then you have your Soulstone Sanctuary, which is a ninja for Kaido's ability. It's a fairy for the spell stutter and just a reasonable creature land, all things considered. So we will go to a sweet one here. Firewalk with Bob went 31-10 with Dimir Skeletons. So just kind of one thing I like to look at these community decks is seeing how they do against the more popular decks. So against black 6-2, against mono red 1-3. So not the best kind of matchup there, but overall they've had a positive win rate against pretty much everything. And this deck here is Skeleton. So we have Death Baron, which is a Lord. Was in the kind of Foundations starter kit extra set. When in doubt, just say it's part of Foundations. So skeletons you control and other zombies get a +1/1 and Death Touch. You're playing that. You're playing Adaptive Automaton, which comes in as a skeleton and then gives your other skeletons plus. So you got a bunch of Lord effects. You have Case of the Stashed Skeleton, which makes you skeletons. Corpse of the Lost gives your skeletons extra power and haste, and then can come back to hand and get you to recast, so you get that token. The Mockingbird comes in as any copy of your Lord with evasion. You have these cheap 1-drop 2-power skeletons, and then Tiny Bones as another kind of skeleton with some advantage. You got a whole bunch of cheap bounce in this deck. So opting for the bounce, almost more tempo oriented than removal. The bounce has some flexibility within summon, where if your removal is dead in a way, you can just bounce it back to your creatures back to your hand, which is kind of sweet. And then lastly, we have Rabbits. So this one went 34-12 by Wicked Skills. Notably, really reasonable win rate against black, 7-1. A lot of the black removals 1-for-1, where the rabbits kind of goes wide, which could be like a good way to approach it. 4-0 against red's encouraging. The old leyline versions I really struggled against with the rabbits deck because they were like a turn 2 faster. But the rabbits deck kind of snowballs pretty hard once you get going. So looking at the deck itself, one thing I always state with these decks, a lot of these wildcards only work for this deck. So if you're kind of not stingy but cautious with your wildcards, this may not be the best deck. You want to look at stuff that has overlapping. So stuff like the mice package works in a bunch of different decks. The annex works in a bunch of different black decks, stuff like that. But you have a bunch of powerful 1-drops, gets bigger when other squirrels come into play, or rabbits, sorry. You have War Leader that gets more power from tokens. Paw Patch can put counters and offsprings. A Lord puts counters, scales with your creatures. Hop 2, it gives you 3 bodies. Your War Leader is kind of your Anthem effect, along with Sanguine. Card Advantage with Knight Errant, and then Season of Burrow, just flexible kind of top-end card. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, and if you're making that push for top 1,200. Like I said, if you haven't done so, hit that sub button. We are trying to hit 16,000 subs by the end of the year. Greatly appreciate it if you can, and we will catch you on the flip side. Happy New Year's, and we'll see you in 2025.